Why, hello there, friends. It's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. I hope you're all having a very merry and blessed Christmas season. The old year is almost finished, a new year is almost upon us, and that means it is time, once again, for my 10th annual Top Reads of the Year video. We started back in 2015. I did 15 top books. In 2016, we did 16, 2017, 17, 2018, 18, 2019, 19, 2020, 20, 2021, 21, 2022, 22, 2023, 23, and now for 2024, I did put together, let's see if I can pick this up without dropping it, because I've already dropped it a couple times, top 24 books of the year. Let's do it. Now, as you guys may know, I have a Substack. It's bookishprincess.substack.com. It's a blog and newsletter, and it's really nice to have like a space for longer written pieces, but I can also upload videos there. You might be watching this video on Substack because you can watch it without like the YouTube ads and the bells and whistles that try to draw you in, although let's be honest, every social media platform has its bells and whistles that try to draw you in. But I do like that Substack is a little bit more streamlined and like it goes straight to your email, so you can just read it in your email if you want. But I decided I was going to take my favorite quotations, pick a quotation from each work that really spoke to me, and collect those for all 24 of these titles on Substack rather than trying to read out the quotations to you here. So make sure you pop over bookishprincess.substack.com to see the quotations. I feel like they're a fun little taster. I'm going to try to go in the same order. So I'll remind myself. I tried to do these like roughly chronologically of when I read them throughout the year, although it didn't work out exactly that way, but it's roughly. See, even if I spent 2 minutes talking about every single one of these books, this video would then be 48 minutes long, and I'd like to keep it quick and kind of snappy. So we're going to start with a book that I got as a Christmas present from my brother Porthos, which is conveniently at the bottom of the stack. It is The Tale of Snow White and the Widow Queen, written by Jonathan Peugeot, illustrated by Heather Pollington. This is from the Symbolic World. First of all, this book is just a thing of beauty. The illustrations are absolutely gorgeous and lovely, but I do also love how Jonathan Peugeot has retold the Snow White story and like incorporated lots of traditional things, but like kind of brought them to light in a new way. I really loved listening to some of his podcasts and talks about the Snow White story. That was a great kind of corollary, a great addition to reading the actual storybook itself. And it's so funny because over the years, I've been told a lot that I look like Snow White. And for the most part, I feel like it's just kind of a superficial thing. Like Snow White hasn't necessarily resonated with me as a character. Jordan Peterson was once talking about feminine hero archetypes, and he was talking about how Belle is a great archetype, and I would totally agree with that. In the past, her story and her character has really resonated with me. But it's funny how the feminine hero archetypes are a little bit more difficult to find, maybe because they're a little bit more under the radar. They're a little bit softer and gentler and not as in your face. Today's culture doesn't really promote hero archetypes that are powerful in a truly feminine type of way, like John Paul II when he talks about the feminine genius, or Mary, the mother of God. She's obviously the ultimate feminine hero archetype. But they are possible. It is possible to find them. In fact, I would say there are tons of beautiful feminine hero archetypes in the books that I'm going to talk about today. And just reading this by Jonathan Peugeot kind of made me realize the power of Snow White. He talks about how, you know, a young woman hoping to find her match, her Prince Charming, like there are a lot of guys, a lot of different types of guys that you're going to meet along the way. You know, maybe 7 of them. The 7 dwarves kind of represent unintegrated personality traits. And you really see this in the Disney movie, right? Because like Grumpy is too grumpy. He has not integrated his grumpiness into his personality. Or Happy or Sneezy or Dopey, like they're all too much of one thing. And Prince Charming is like an integrated whole person, you know, the whole package, the man, not the boy. But as a Snow White waiting for that, you can't get angry and bitter at the dopies and the grumpies you meet along the way. You have to find a way to love them as well and to serve them as well and to be their friends. And that's what Snow White does. So yeah, in the past, I always felt like I'm not really Snow White. I just look like her. But then listening to Jonathan Peugeot's interpretation, I was like, wait, I am Snow White. I think I already spent more than 2 minutes talking about this, and we have 23 more books to go. So anyway, this was lovely. Number 2, I also read back at the beginning of the year. It was absolutely charming. So perfect for winter, perfect for Christmas time. In fact, starting this book a little earlier in December would be great because it has St. Nicholas Day. But this is Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates. It's by Mary Mapes Dodge. I feel like there are all these children's classics that you know the name, you vaguely know what they're about, but you never actually sat down and read them. Or maybe you've seen the Disney version, but you haven't sat down and read the original book. And every time I go and I track down the original book and I sit down and read it, it is just so rewarding. Like, I'm sure it'd be fun for kids, but like as an adult, it's just so beautiful to see the themes and to just appreciate how wonderful the story is. This is so special because there's so much of history that is put into it of the Netherlands and like the geography of the country. You can tell that Mary Mapes Dodge, she really researched it and like loved it. Like you hear about the painters and the scientists and the traditions and customs, but there's also a charming story of the silver skates. There's so much skating. I love to skate, and so the idea of being able to skate between two beautiful European cities, like maybe I need to plan a winter trip to the Netherlands, honestly. I've been to Amsterdam, but it wasn't winter. So charming, so lovely. Definitely worth grabbing. Back in February, I was one of the co-hosts of the Feb Regency Readathon, which was all about celebrating the literature of Britain's Regency time period. One of our past co-hosts, Jennifer Brooks, actually passed away at the beginning of this year, which was just so shocking and saddening, and I still think of her frequently. And one of the books that I read for Feb Regency was in her memory, because she loved this. It's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by Lord Byron. It, of course, takes us through Italy and Europe, but it's also just a beautiful, lyrical, singing kind of poem, because Byron's poetry is just absolutely incredible. This is not actually the only poetry volume on my list though, and I feel like this year, spending time reading a volume of poetry and just sinking into the rhythm and the meter and the lovely, lovely phrasing has been wonderful. I want to do more of that in 2025. I put a quotation in the blog, so I'm not putting a quotation here. We need to move along. The other book that I read or reread for Feb Regency was Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. She was one of Jane Austen's favorite authors. She was very popular in the Regency era. You don't hear as much about her now. I don't understand why, because she was absolutely brilliant. She was as good as you would expect Jane Austen's favorite author to be, and I think her writing still reads so well. Like, so many of her themes and ideas are so contemporary. Her characters are so funny and witty and relatable and complex. Lady Delacour is at the heart of Belinda. Belinda's about a young lady named Belinda who's coming of age in society and the society of London and trying to find her way, between the pretenders and the ones that are real but have maybe lost their way. And she's staying with Lady Delacour. When I read this, I was telling my mom how much I loved it, so she read it, and then it started her on this whole Mariah Edgeworth kick, and she went and read a ton more Mariah Edgeworth novels, which next year I'm gonna have to read another Mariah Edgeworth. I feel like I need to keep her on the TBR every year. She is spectacular. Another author who is on my reading list every single year is Elizabeth Goudge. This year I reread The Little White Horse with my online book club that I do with subscribers. It was such a delight to come back to this. It had been quite a number of years. We used to read it growing up. My mom would read it aloud to us as kids. It's about Maria Merryweather. She is a moon princess returning to Moonacre Manor, her kind of family's ancestral estate. And she learns about this legend of a lion and a little white horse. She's learning about the history and past sins of her family, but she has an opportunity to make things right in a really beautiful way. Elizabeth Goudge is just such a beautiful writer. She's deep, she's cozy, she's charming, she's spiritual. She also writes adult novels, and those she often goes a lot more deep into spiritual things, but even in this, it is absolutely present. This is probably a good place to start with Elizabeth Goudge, actually. A City of Bells, which is an adult novel, is another one that I love to recommend. One of my friends had this book basket party that she got the idea on Instagram, so we all came with a little basket with a book, and I, of course, had to buy A City of Bells, and I put it in a little teacup-shaped basket that I found at a floral store. I was kind of proud of my basket, guys, if I'm honest. And I wrapped it in Jingle Bells. But anyway, that's A City of Bells. This is The Little White Horse. Read it. It's so wonderful. See, this is the problem with all these books. I could just be read it. It's so wonderful. And talking about them all, it's oh, I should reread it. This next one is a children's book that I do not know how I didn't read when I was growing up. I don't know how that happened, because it's so amazing and so me. I was talking about this with my cousin Becky at the beginning of the year, and she's like, you need this book. So she bought it for me and sent it to me. And it was absolutely a delight to read. The Phantom Tollbooth appears in Milo's room, and Milo is very gray, very bored with everything. He's just a little kid who kind of takes everything for granted. But the Phantom Tollbooth takes him on an adventure to this faraway land where rhyme and reason are no longer on the throne, and everything is as chaotic as you would expect it to be. It's so witty. There's so much wordplay. Actually, it's a delight reading as an adult, because I think there are a lot of things that you would just think were funny and quirky as a kid, but as an adult, you're like, whoa, this symbolism, like this is spot on. Okay, so we're up to April. April was Alcott April, which was a readathon I co-hosted that was so much fun. There are 2 books from Alcott April that made it on the list. One is Rose in Bloom. So this is actually a 2-book series by Louisa May Alcott. The first is called 8 Cousins. Honestly, they kind of go together. Like, you should definitely read 8 Cousins first. But I did like Rose in Bloom a little bit better. Rose is a little bit more grown up, and there's some romance, and it's fun to see how the cousins turn out. I should probably warn you, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not. This is just general warning. You know how in Little Women you lose characters who are very dear to you, like big characters? You know, you can expect that in Louisa May Alcott's other works. I'll just put it like that. So much beautiful wisdom, so many charming scenes. In the sequel to 8 Cousins, Rose Campbell returns to the Ant Hill because she has a lot of aunts, but one uncle who she really loves. I totally think the uncle was based on Thoreau. Louisa May Alcott grew up in this incredible literary circle. Her dad was a philosopher, and he was friends with Thoreau and Emerson. And one fun thing about Rose in Bloom is the way the characters talk about Thoreau and Emerson. Like, they exchange their favorite passages, and that's just so meaningful because, like, Louisa May Alcott literally knew these people. So it should be no surprise that the next book on my top list is a volume of Emerson's poetry. This is the Everyman Pocket Poets edition. Whenever I'm at a cute independent bookstore and I like want to buy a book just like as a memory of the place, I usually gravitate towards the poetry section. The spines are so lovely. They look so cute together. But it was so perfect that I had Emerson because after reading Louisa May Alcott and hearing him quoted in Rose in Bloom, and like I was saying with Byron, it's just so lovely to sit down with this and just kind of sink into a long poem. It like feels like you're floating out in the water, or you're dancing, or you're listening to a piece of music. There's just something so lovely about it. And I'm not going to read you a quotation. If you want to hear the quotation, you can go over to Substack. Keep it moving, Emma. So the classic Christian work, The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, was on my top reads of the year last year. So this year we have The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis. I had no idea this existed. Shout out to Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space. She told me about this book, and I'm so glad I read it. It was absolutely amazing to hear C.S. Lewis retake the Pilgrim's Progress story, and his character basically goes through the exact same landscape, but in a different order than you would expect. And the characters he meets are similar. They're all very allegorical, but they're a lot more related to, modern day, because of course he was writing about the problems of the mid-20th century, and we're still dealing with those problems, some of them exacerbated. I think some of the references Lewis was making in Pilgrim's Regress are to like very specific philosophies and even individuals. Even if you're not familiar with, the references he's making, it still reads beautifully. There's so much wisdom in it. My top spiritual work of the year, though, has to go to John Paul II. I read Love and Responsibility by Karol Wojtyla. He wrote it before he became Pope. But this is very similar to the Theology of the Body lectures that he gave. In fact, I think I read somewhere that this is sort of the philosophical version of Theology of the Body, which Theology of the Body is so amazing. And I feel like Love and Responsibility was the perfect way for me to come at it. I took my time. I think I read this over the course of 4 or 5 months. It is very dense, but it's so beautiful the way he just carefully and methodically picks apart all these lies that we've gotten ourselves sort of mired in modern culture. And maybe, in any age, honestly. It's not like it's ever been easy to be human. We've always been flawed and frail creatures. His topic really is God's creation and how God created us and working with the bodies and the natures God gave us instead of against them. So it's just really beautiful to see this great mind, like so rooted in God, just kind of slowly going through this complicated topic. This is about love and responsibility, femininity, masculinity, sexuality, and those are often touchy subjects. They're often subjects Christians don't even want to talk about, but I think the rest of the culture then talks about them in such completely off the rails ways that it's like, okay, we as Christians need to figure out how to talk about this and how to speak about this with love and truth and how to, unravel all those lies, because it breaks your heart, honestly. Like seeing the way so many people live out in the world and like seeing some of the news headlines, it like just absolutely breaks your heart. It's like our modern culture wants you to think that following the traditional Christian teachings is somehow weird and like people don't do that anymore. People still do that. There are a lot of us that still do it. If you haven't been doing it, you can start doing it. Like, it's not crazy. It's like literally the path to life. It seems like maybe our culture is slowly starting to wake up and realizing that like the sexual revolution and the pill were not a good thing, and like traditional Christian sexual ethics are actually really great and like keep you healthy and safe and sane. See, with all of these books, like I could talk and talk to you about what I found beautiful in them, but really you should just sit down and read them for yourself, because then it will speak to you in its own way. Hugely important book, hugely important perspective. These next two reads were both book club reads. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I had never read this before. My brother Athos recommended it. I actually haven't seen the movie all the way through either, which I know is kind of crazy. I've seen scenes of it. I should sit down and watch the movie, honestly. I want to sit down and watch it with my brother Athos because he loves it and knows it so well. But I'm so glad he recommended this book. It was so fun to read with the book club. Michael Crichton, he just hits all the great things that you want in a book. It's philosophical, it's thought-provoking, it like delves into these problems of humankind and like the mistakes humans can make, in this case especially like taking technology too far and being irresponsible with technology. But then he's also got a great variety of characters. All of them are well drawn. All of them like have these different passionate interests. It's so fun to hear more about like paleontology. But then there's also action. There's suspense. I thought the gore and the violence, I mean, it's dinosaurs, right? It's dinosaurs eating people. I don't think that's a spoiler for Jurassic Park. I think everyone knows that. So like there's gonna be a little gore, but like he always kind of draws the curtain right when it becomes too much. So I really appreciated that, because like if it had been like really, really macabre and gruesome, I would not read it. But I felt like he really hit just the right note. I now feel like I need to read the sequels. And this next book, it was also a book club pick, and there are also sequels to this book, and I had no idea because I'd read this before. This is a favorite book of mine, The Scarlet Pimpernel by Bernice Orczy. I never know how to pronounce that, but it's the thrilling story of an aristocratic hero with a double life. It set the standard for all tales of masked avengers that would follow. It takes place in revolutionary Paris, and this British spy, very daredevil character, the Scarlet Pimpernel, is constantly sneaking in and saving these aristos from the guillotine, and of course the French desperately want to capture him. There's the beautiful Marguerite, who married a British man, and so she's from Paris. Her old friends from Paris want her to help them catch the Scarlet Pimpernel. But I love how this like dives into the complexity of history. Obviously there were terrible aristocrats, but like not every aristocrat was terrible. Was just chopping off all their heads the right answer? And the people in charge of the revolution ended up committing ridiculous excesses. There's romance, there's adventure, there's suspense, there's mystery. It's really fantastic. And like I said, I found out through our book club that there are sequels. I had no idea. I definitely need to find those and check them out. All right, we're halfway there. Number 13 is A Backward Glance by Edith Wharton. This is Edith Wharton's autobiography. She wrote classics like Age of Innocence, Ethan Frome, although it's funny reading in the autobiography. She's like, actually, that wasn't my favorite. This autobiography covers so many different subjects. We hear about her childhood, growing up in New York high society. We hear like her thoughts of like modern day. She can look back in this backward glance and see the bad things, but also the good things that we've lost. She talks about her travels in Europe. She talks about her writing and her craft, and she talks about all the people she knew. She was good friends with Henry James. That chapter actually kind of lost me for a little bit, because you could tell she was talking about very dear friends, and yet you didn't know them, so you didn't necessarily connect to them as much. But reading that actually got me thinking how, you know, every book you read, like you associate it with the author, it's their creation, and yet all of the people around the author, all the books they read and all the friends they had and family they had, everyone they came into contact with informed that book. Like, it's not just the one individual. Like, books are born out of communities, and you know, you can kind of see that in Edith Wharton. You're getting a glimpse of the community of people around her that helped her grow and helped her write. It's funny, I actually don't necessarily care for her books. She talks about one point at how like the frivolity of her, you know, high society New York friends, like it was very shallow, and she felt that that frivolity could often destroy. And that's what you see in her novels. And it's true, shallowness and frivolity can destroy, but like you can also find bright spots and you can also find depth in the frivolous. Her stories are all about people who just get pulled down, you know, beneath the depths by this shallow society. And I guess I would prefer a story where people manage to ride it out. And that's what I think she herself did. So there is this funny disconnect between like the sort of gloom of her novels and the brightness of some of her nonfiction, her autobiography, her life. Not that she didn't have her own challenges and difficulties, because she absolutely did. But she's just a really amazing person, and so I loved reading A Backward Glance. Next we have good old G.K. Chesterton, The Club of Queer Trades. It's so funny, this is such a slim book, but it took me months to really get into it and sink into it. The first couple chapters, like I liked them, and there's beautiful writing and thought-provoking, you know, descriptions, and yet it just didn't grab me. But then the third chapter I thought was really funny and definitely grabbed me, and then I ended up finishing it quite quickly. It is very episodic, so the chapters kind of stand on their own, but they are all about the same character, Basil Grant, and they do all tie into the same theme, and there is a bit of an arc. It's about the Club of Queer Trades, so basically to belong to this British club, you have to have invented a new trade, like invented a whole new way of making a living. I do really love G.K. Chesterton. He is deeply quirky and quirkily deep, if that's a phrase. So fun that he actually did these illustrations himself as well. I think we're going to read The Poet and the Lunatics by G.K. Chesterton as one of our first book club picks for next year. So if you're not on our book club email list yet and you would like to join in for that, you can send me an email, emma@bookishprincess.com, and I'll make sure I add you to the list. Yeah, I think we're gonna do that. Maybe Howl's Moving Castle. And then also I was thinking Island Magic by Elizabeth Gooch. Those are kind of our first 3 books, I think, that we'll do for 2025. A D.E. Stevenson book is next on the list, Smoldering Fire. This is the first time I read this one. D.E. Stevenson luckily wrote a lot of books, and I love a lot of them. Like Miss Bunkle's book is so good, The Blue Sapphire. Just, it's delightful to have so many, because she's kind of like Jane Austen, you know, she has great characters, very charming, cozy scenes, beautiful romances, vivid settings, but also depth, some thoughts you can really chew on, some things that really inspire you. This book was so fascinating because it takes place in Scotland, and this character, he kind of feels a pull between him of the Highland and the Lowland. So like the more British English, and then the more like truly Celtic Highland Scots. He's had to rent his house to make ends meet, but he stays like on his ancestral lands, but he doesn't want his tenants to know like that he's around, because that would be awkward. But his tenants end up being charming people as well. Mrs. Hetherington Smith, is that her name? She's so adorable, and like the heroine is so adorable. The ending of this is kind of surprising. I was a little bit thrown for a loop by the twist it took. It's a unique D.E. Stevenson, definitely worth reading. One of the unintentional themes of my reading this year ended up being rereading like just my absolute favorite books that I just absolutely love, that I would recommend to anybody anytime at the drop of a hat, that like come up first as like my favorites, like Little White Horse. So spectacular. The Scarlet Pimpernel, and these next 3 books that I'm about to tell you about. The first one is These Happy Golden Years by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I reread most of the Little House on the Prairie series last year, so I did have Little Town on the Prairie on my 2023 top reads list. But I was saving These Happy Golden Years to savor, and I read it in January, and I didn't want it to end. It's so delicious. Rereading this series made me realize like how like deeply ingrained these books and these characters are for me. They've just got this grit, you know, this can-do, get it done, don't complain grit. Then they also have this love of beauty. They also have this sense of adventure. They also have this spiritual depth, this reliance on God. They also have this independent spirit and this independent judgment. They're not going to be fooled. You know, they do not go along with the crowd. They think for themselves. And they also have this beautiful humor, this family loyalty and family life, and I just can't tell you how much I love Laura Ingalls Wilder. And Almanzo Wilder? I love him. I love his horses. I love how he and Laura fit together so perfectly. I don't even have anything to say. I just love them. I think this and Little Town on the Prairie I've reread the most out of the series. Although Farmer Boy also I've reread a lot. That's about Almanzo's life growing up, and that's also so charming. If you've never picked up this series, or if you haven't picked it up in a while, like do yourself a favor and revisit it. And if you see any Almanzo Wilders out there in the world, let me know. This next book is another absolute top tier favorite of mine. It is called The Perilous Guard by Elizabeth Marie Pope. I wish this author had written more. I love the Sherwood Ring that's set in colonial times. The Elizabethan setting is also spectacular. The fairies, the way she deals with them, and they're so complex. They are not your typical Tinkerbell fairy. These are legit people of the hill fairies who have their own strength, and they're the villains of the story, and yet there are so many things about them that you really look up to and admire. Kate, our heroine, ends up getting to know them quite well. I just love this. See, this is the problem with all these books. I'm like, I just love this. Yeah, Kate's adventure is so exciting. Like, you have to keep reading to get to the end. Christopher is the hero. He's also fantastic. I love the dynamic between him and Kate. I love the ending. Like, it's just, so good. So this next book is from another series that I grew up with, like Little House on the Prairie. It is from the Betsy-Tacy series. Betsy-Tacy series is set in the early 1900s in this small town in Minnesota. It's just a charming tale of this little girl growing up with her sisters, with her friends, and you just go back in time, and it's so warm and wise and beautiful and just lovingly detailed. It is based on the author's own life. It's by Maud Hart Lovelace. Betsy, in spite of herself, takes place during Betsy's sophomore high school year, and she ends up going on a trip to Milwaukee to visit her friend Tib. And it's Christmas time, and just the Christmas time in Milwaukee was so lovely. Betsy wants to make some changes though. She wants to become a little bit more grown up. And so she kind of formulates this plan in Milwaukee, and we see how that turns out. I think next year I am definitely gonna have to embark on a full reread of the full series from the beginning. Betsy in the Great World is where Betsy goes abroad to Europe, and I love that one. That one is the one I've reread the most. And there are some standalone books as well, like Emily of Deep Valley, Carney's House Party. But yeah, I think next year I'm gonna have to do a full reread of the full series. But this was a great taster of it. And sometimes she just surprises you with these like beautiful turns of phrase and beautiful writing. She describes the Merry Widow waltz because the characters go dancing. I've been getting into dancing this year, so I love the descriptions of that and how they throw this dance with dance cards. I'm throwing a dance with dance cards next year. Such a treat to get to know Betsy's family, but it's also such a treat to get to know her crowd, her friends who just always pop in on her. You know, these days I feel like it can be hard to find a really great crowd of friends. Like reading about Betsy's crowd in the past, I feel like would make me feel like, wow, like that's almost unbelievable. You know, like during high school or during college, maybe you can have those friends, but then, you know, you graduate and you leave, and like it's really hard to get connected with the community. But like reading this book this year, I feel so incredibly blessed because I have a crowd of friends like Betsy's. Like sometimes it feels like, oh, that doesn't exist anymore in the digital age, but actually it does, and it can. And the reason I tell you this is to encourage you. If you would like a crowd and you don't have one, or you had one and you lost it, like just keep digging, keep looking, keep praying. If you ask God for it, He will bring it to you. Like, be humble. That's something I've discovered this year, is like the power of humility. You know, you drag yourself to some event, some talk, and you're hoping you'll find friends, you're hoping you'll meet your husband, but you don't end up meeting any kindred spirits, and you go home like feeling depressed. But like, you can actually change that reaction. You can reframe it and realize, you know what, maybe God needed me to smile at one person. Maybe God needed me to hold the door for just one person, and that was enough. Like, that was good enough. I can go on that little mission and do that for God. That's not a problem. And I think when you have that attitude, then God can use that and build that. And then you find the friends, you know, you find the crowd. Your crowd might not be in your backyard. They might be an hour's drive away. But don't give up. Don't think it doesn't exist, because it does. And I feel like the more crowds we can create and foster in this world, like the better the world's gonna get. And they have to be in person. You know, you can obviously make so many great connections over the internet and like access so many ideas, but in-person human connection is so important. And I think that sometimes we like just forget, and we drift into this habit of letting the digital connections kind of take the place of the real life connections, and they can't, is the thing. All right, we're getting through it, guys. Just how many more? 5 more? Just like Mariah Edgeworth is a forgotten Regency author who needs to make a comeback and is absolutely fantastic, this next author is a Victorian author who is fantastic and needs to make a comeback. She was more popular than Dickens in her day. I tell everyone that. I'm like, excuse me, Charlotte Mary Young, get on the train. I don't know why the train ever stalled at the station, but we need to get this train rolling again. I found out about Charlotte Mary Young from Kate Howe here on BookTube. I read Pillars of the House last year. absolutely loved it. Her books are chunky, but like, do not be afraid because you will not be able to put them down. Like, I get through Charlotte Mary Young books faster than like shorter books because I can't stop reading. They're so delicious. And like the things I've been talking about with some of these other authors, it's just a great literary mix of everything you want: the characters, the coziness, the depth, the romance, the interesting scenes and vignettes. It really feels like time travel reading Charlotte Mary Young. It feels like you are going back in time and being part of this, you know, warm Victorian family who's just trying to make things work, and they don't all get along, and things are complicated, and their neighbors are a mess. They're trying to be good stewards of their community. The book on the list this year is The Three Brides, and in it, three brides literally arrive home on the same day, and they're all living under the same roof with the mom. I love that faith is so central to these characters. Like, faith is such a major theme and something that they're all striving for in their different ways. It's too bad she's kind of anti-Catholic. Like, that part doesn't make sense to me. That's an unfortunate prejudice, but like, her faith is still so beautiful. Let's be honest, the British just sometimes were that way. I'm Irish, so sometimes I'm a little anti-British, you know? Sometimes I think about what they did to my people and how they stole our ancestral castle, and I get a little mad. We get along in spite of it. There's a Christmas party in Charlotte Mary Young that is so wonderful and beautiful, and it's like so elaborate. It's like practically a stage production, but like every single one of the guests, it's like they wrote a little limerick or riddle, and they have like a joke gift and also a like real beautiful lovely gift for each guest, and it just makes you feel like, wow, like I want to do that, but like the amount of time that you would put into doing that, I just loved that. It's my secret ambition to have a party like that someday. The beautiful thing about Charlotte Mary Young, though, is that there are these charming, just delicious, lovely scenes, but like there's also loss, there's suffering, there's grief, there are very serious challenges. She doesn't cut any of it out. She puts it all on the table. Highly recommend Charlotte Mary Young. Highly recommend. See, I could have just like made this simple for myself and be like, this, highly recommend, absolutely loved it. This, highly recommend, absolutely loved it. When I was putting together this list, I had like 22, 23 books that were all in that top tier. And like, I was really struggling to pick a last title because there were other good books that I did enjoy, but they didn't have that, I don't know, that sparkle, that oomph, you know, that twinkle that made me be like, yes, this one belongs on the list. So I tweaked the rules a little bit. I mean, they're all my own rules. This is my project. I make the rules. This next one is not actually a book. It is a lecture. I've been listening to these lectures as podcasts. Audiobooks, like, would count as a book. So we're gonna count the lecture as a book. I signed up for Peterson Academy this year. This is Jordan Peterson's online university. It's funny because I haven't been taking the quizzes or doing the assignments. Like, I'm not sure I'm gonna do that. I'm not sure I need or want like a degree. Maybe I'll go back and do the assignments, but I just think the lectures and the lecturers are all fantastic, and so I've just been listening to them as podcasts in the car. The quality of them is truly excellent. You obviously have Jordan Peterson in there, you have Jonathan Pajot, but like then we also have, there's a course on nutrition that I've been taking and really loved, but the one that I'm putting on this list is the one that I've enjoyed the most, is The History of Western Music with Samuel Andreev. And the way he talks about music, I've been learning so many things about music that I didn't know, like so many things about the history of, you know, how they invented like notation and how it came to be that there was do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, you know, like how all those things came about. And hearing him talk about Bach is so inspiring. Like, I never really knew why Bach was special, but he tells you and shows you why Bach is special. I really need to go and like read a biography of Bach and listen to more of his music. It's just such a wonderful lecture series. And there are a ton of different lectures on there that I haven't even listened to yet, so I'm very excited to listen to more of those in 2025. Beverly Nichols is like P.G. Wodehouse, that dry, hilarious British humor, but think gardens and cats. Like, he's really great. He's so witty and so funny. I loved his book, Down the Garden Path, and I also have loved his Cats A, B, C, and XYZ. They're really delicious, but this one, I think, might be my favorite Beverly Nichols of all. Down the Garden Path was about like flowers and gardens, but it felt a little bit hodgepodge, like this plant and that plant. Mary Hall, it's nonfiction, so it's not like a story, and yet it has a little bit more of a story to it because Beverly Nichols purchases this very impractical Georgian estate called Mary Hall, and it has a big garden, like big grounds, and he really slowly over the course of 5 years transforms transforms it. And so we hear about that transformation. We hear about his neighbors who are very annoying, and I'm pretty sure he drew them right from real life. And he does not hold back. He is so sarcastic and funny. Sometimes he goes over the top. In fact, some of the stuff he says about women just making me really annoyed. And in fact, there's this one chapter where he's saying all these kind of insulting things, and he's like, ladies, but I have a fun game. Let's play it. Don't get mad at me yet. And then he talks about how this game he played was he had this beautiful painting of a floral arrangement, just a painting of a vase of flowers, and he decided to recreate it. So he had to go track down every single one of the flowers, and he found them in the most far-flung places because he wrote about the war. He traveled around. He did serious writing as well as this sort of frivolous writing. So yes, in spite of some of his deficiencies, he is really great, and Mary Hall was an absolute delight. And there are two more books in the Mary Hall Chronicles. He is out of print, so you are gonna have to splurge on a used copy, but it is so worth it. We've gotten to the point where the books are all a mess. Okay, hold on, what am I looking for? This next book is easy to find. I'm pretty sure you can get it on Gutenberg or for pretty cheap online. It is Little Lord Fauntleroy by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Frances Hodgson Burnett, of course, wrote Secret Garden and The Little Princess. Little Lord Fauntleroy, am I pronouncing that correctly? It's one of those book titles that you hear and you probably associate it with the little boy with the ruff. He's probably a little bit of a goody two-shoes. But when you go back and read the original, it's such a delight. He's a little bit of a goody two-shoes, but he's also just a really fun little boy. He's grown up in America with his mom and his dad. His dad is the second or third son of this aristocratic British gentleman. And when the other men in the succession all die, they go and find this little boy and they, bring him back to England. So he gets to know his grandfather, who's all crotchety. And of course, he warms his heart. And yes, okay, I get that it sounds a little smarmy and cheesy on the surface. And yes, it is a little smarmy and cheesy. But you know what? Frances Hodgson Burnett strikes just the right note. There's this wry humor that kind of is laughing at itself that sneaks in every now and again. It rescues it from becoming absolutely smarmy. Louisa May Alcott, I also have this problem with sometimes. Sometimes she's just right there on the edge of, oh, this is a little too smarmy. But for me, she strikes the right balance, and I would say Frances Hodgson Burnett does as well. She had a really fascinating life. I read a garden biography of her. I think it was just called The Gardening Life of Frances Hodgson Burnett. That was so wonderful. She would hop back and forth between England and America as if it was nothing. When this was the days of liner voyages where you have to get on a ship. But I think having that unique perspective of kind of between two worlds, between America and England, gives her a really fresh, lovely perspective. Okay, this next one, I almost didn't include this. It's definitely not a topic or a book that everyone needs. So if this does not speak to you and your situation in life, please feel free to skip ahead. Maybe there are some women out there who are like me and maybe need to hear this, and maybe this can be helpful to you. Because I know it's been helpful to me. I should say that this is not a 100% endorsement of this book. There are some parts of it that I'm that does not apply to me. That is kind of off base. But then again, there are also things that are really helpful. I actually heard about this book first from a book called Seraphic Singles by Dorothy Cummings McLean. I've mentioned her before. She's a Catholic blogger. She wrote a blog called Seraphic Singles, and she's hopped around to other blogs since then. She currently has a blog about waltzing and dancing because she promotes traditional dancing in her community in Scotland. So she referenced this book in her book. And Seraphic Singles, I probably should have put that book on last year's top reads of the year list, but I was a little self-conscious. But that book is more sort of solid, or comes from a more solid foundation. And there's actually another book, I can't remember the name of it now. I saw the author on the Lila Rose podcast, Rachel Hoover Canto, and that was a good episode. There's another good episode with Alessandra Conti. So those are all probably more sound foundations than the book I'm about to tell you about. The book is called The Rules. It's by Ellen Fine and Sherry Schneider. It originally came out in the 90s as a book called The Rules, time-tested secrets to capturing the heart of Mr. Right. And they've published a bunch of different editions. I have read most of them. The one that I first read was this most recent one. This came out, I think, a couple of years ago, The Rules Handbook, A Guide to Creating Loving and Lasting Relationships. This is probably a good place to start if you feel like God is maybe nudging you to read this book. What this book is it's Edna Mode in The Incredibles, when she's talking to Mrs. Incredible and is like kind of reading her the riot act. This book is written in that kind of emphatic style that's just sort of like a bucket of cold water in the face. Like it just wakes you up and like makes you realize some things that you didn't realize you were doing or that you need to do differently. It's just like that Edna mode that like is in the back of your mind, like, don't you dare text that boy. That boy does not deserve a text. You're not looking for a boy. You're a high value woman looking for a high value man. You know, like, see, it's good to laugh about it. You just have to laugh about it at some point. You know, I'm a faithful Catholic. I'm more traditionally minded. Sometimes, like in the world generally, you just feel sort of out of it these days. I've always felt called to marriage. I've always felt that was my vocation. You know, God hasn't had Mr. Right show up quite yet. I think in the past I had a little bit more of a Jane Austen attitude towards it. Like, you know, it'll happen naturally. Like, it'll happen when it happens. God will just bring the right guy. We'll cross paths. It's not something I have to work towards. Like, I don't want to set my cap at men. I don't want to chase men. I'm not some Lydia Bennet. And the rules would absolutely agree. You do not chase men. That is 100% one of the rules. You do not chase men. But, you know, Jane Austen, in the first place, she never got married herself. And in the second place, she lived in a culture that was basically, the whole culture was working and operating to bring young people together to form faithful Christian marriages. And you know, you could pick holes in that. Obviously, not every marriage was perfect. Not all those people were faithful Christians, but a lot of them were. And unfortunately, today's culture, it feels like the culture around us is like actively working to undermine young people trying to find their vocation in a faithful marriage. And it's really heartbreaking to look out and see the state of the culture and the state of the world. Sometimes just the idea of finding someone out there, it just feels impossible. But the thing is, God is at his best in impossible situations. That's when he delights to get to work. He's like, you think it's too late? We're gonna wait a little bit longer and then show you that it's not too late. That's the whole story of the cross. God really shines when it seems like all hope is lost. But he does need us to get up and fight with him. And I feel like that's kind of how the rules has encouraged me. Within the past couple of years, I really started putting myself out there, just working harder, kind of like we were talking about earlier, just working harder to find a community, to find friends. And I have been, you know, going on more dates, and especially like when I was first putting myself out there more, it felt so intimidating, and I felt like, I don't know how to do this, like I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Like, I wish there was a set of rules, because it feels like there should be a set of rules. And that's when God dropped the rules book into my lap. He was like, you want some rules? Oh, here you go. I wouldn't recommend following all of them, but you know, you wanted them, so. See, the thing is, once you know the rules, then you can break the rules and bend the rules and like rewrite them to your own specifications. Because like we already said, some of the stuff in here, it's like, that's not quite it. But there are some really, really helpful points in here about, you know, knowing your own worth and being confident in yourself. Another big thing that really spoke to me is just the idea of not getting discouraged. Like, keep putting yourself out there where you think you could find the kind of guy you're looking for. Like, don't give up on that because it's difficult. Don't stay at home reading a book, because you're not gonna find him at home reading a book. And when you're out and about, be cheerful, be happy, don't be downtrodden. I had a friend give me this really beautiful piece of advice that like sums it up really well, that, you know, if you feel called to marriage, like, you should take the vocation seriously, but you shouldn't take the individual guys along the way too seriously. As we learned in Jonathan Peugeot's Snow White story, you know, you might have to go through some dwarves. And you know, maybe God just put those guys in your life so you could say some extra prayers for them. It can be really disappointing when you meet someone who seems really promising and it doesn't work out, and it feels like it never works out, but like, it will work out. Don't let that stop you. Don't get stuck there. Keep moving, keep the faith. Another piece of wisdom from another friend is that God cares more about your vocation than you do. So if your vocation is marriage, God's gonna make sure you get there. So I guess that's the long story short of the rules, is God is good and God is faithful. Blessed be our Lord, merciful God, and blessed be his holy and honored name, and may all his works praise him forever. I wrote this blog post last Advent about how it can be difficult to have the right attitude when you're waiting. It can be difficult to stay cheerful and to not get bitter and not get hopeless. And I kind of use the metaphor of a train journey. Like, if you're waiting at the station and, you know, your train hasn't left yet, your train is delayed. I feel like this past year, we've been on the train. Like, the train is moving down the tracks. We're not quite at the end of the journey yet, but we're making progress. We're gonna stay on the upward trajectory. You know, there are a couple contenders in the field at the moment, so we'll see how they play out. But God has a plan. His plan is best, and that's what I'm aiming at. So all shall be well. Okay, that was a lot of tea. So our last book, where is our last book? Our last book has a little more meat to it. I deliberately saved this one for last because it's just been such a wonderful discovery. Madeleine Delbrel. This is called The Joy of Believing. Madeleine Delbrel is servant of God in the Catholic Church, so that means she's on her way to sainthood. She was a convert from atheism. She arrived near Paris in 1933. Her only desire was to live in unconditional openness to the gospel and to become a true neighbor to those living near her, especially the poor. She has such beautiful spiritual writing. This is a collection of just some of her written works on prayer, on apostolic life, on our daily bread, a life of contradiction. It's like divided up into different parts, just short little readings. They're so beautiful. This makes me want to go brush up on my high school French. She has this lyrical, lovely style, and I feel like I can kind of see the original French, like just hovering behind the English translation. She has such a gift of like reaching for these really difficult truths and like expressing them in such a beautiful way. And you know, since she is a more modern writer, she was dealing with very similar things to, you know, the issues we're dealing with today. I actually first heard Madeleine Delbrel's name at a talk I went to over the summer. And I'll admit I kind of bought it because I thought the cover was so beautiful when I was looking at the different Madeleine Delbrel books. But I thought I would actually read you that quotation that first kind of sold me on Madeleine Delbrel, because it's a really beautiful prayer, and I just thought it would be a beautiful way to wrap up this video. One thing that I've really been getting into this year has been dancing. I've been taking lessons, just going to dances. It's been so fun. In the middle of this is when I encountered this Madeleine Delbrel quotation about dancing. It's a prayer about dancing. And I feel like it encapsulates so many of the things that I think are beautiful about dancing. As the follow, you don't know where you're going and you don't know what's next. And yet a good lead can lead you through it. And that is part of the feminine power that like doesn't really get talked about in today's culture, is that power to wait, to that power to follow, that power to be patient and be cheerful even when everything's not going your way. Like Snow White, like many of these heroines in the books we've talked about. And this prayer just like sums that all up using the metaphor of dancing. To be a good dancer with you, as elsewhere, we don't have to know where this leads. We have to follow you and be joyful, to be light on our feet, and above all, not to be rigid. We don't have to ask you for explanations about the steps it pleases you to take. We must be like an agile and lively extension of you, and receive through you the transmission of the orchestra's rhythm. We should not want to advance at all costs, but accept to turn, to go sideways. We must know when to stop and glide instead of walking. And these would be only stupid steps if the music did not harmonize with them. But we forget the music of your spirit, and we make a gymnastic exercise of our lives. That your holy will is that of an inconceivable fancy, and that there is only monotony and boredom for the old souls who are wallflowers at the joyful ball of your love. Lord, come and invite us. We are ready to dance this errand to run, our accounts to keep, evening dinner, that all-nighter when we will be sleepy. We are ready to dance tomorrow, the dance of work, that of the heat, later that of the cold. If some tunes are slightly minor, we will not tell you that they are sad. If others make us a little winded, we will not tell you that it is unbearable. And if some people jostle us, we will take it laughingly, knowing well that this always happens in dancing. Lord, teach us the place the unique dance of our obedience holds in this eternal romance begun between you and us. Show us the grand orchestra of your designs, the harmonies in which what you allow throws strange notes into the serenity of what you desire. Teach us to don every day our human condition like a ball gown, which will make us love all the details of yours as so many priceless jewels. I just think that's so beautiful, and that definitely sums up my year and what I hope to do in the years to come. I just continue to dance with God and to follow his lead wherever he goes. I don't really know where God will lead me and this YouTube channel and my Substack in the new year. I do still have things that I'd like to post about, but I also feel like the internet, you know, has really captured too much of our attention and too much of our energy. And like, I know I really want to put most of my attention and energy out into the tangible, actual world that's right here in front of me. Thank you all so much for watching this. I would really love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about your year. Tell me about your top reads. I'm sending you each a prayer that your 2025 is full of God's grace and joy and many good things and many good books. Thank you, friends, for coming along for the ride. Bye.